Good morning. I'm harleysch from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 6th, 2023. Since it's Friday, I'm going to take up some questions. There were some very good questions sent to me and also some good comments. And I would encourage people to continue to post your comments on both the YouTube and Facebook channel for our videos. Share them, sign up so you can be notified of new material appearing. For example, I'll be talking in a few minutes about an article that I will be posting this weekend on the Twitter files. But it's important that you share our videos, that you join with us, because we represent a absolutely indispensable force in breaking out of the narrative control of the establishment and of providing people in the Western world with an actual picture of what's happening. And I get a sense that many of you understand this from the questions you're sending to me. And I certainly encourage as much dialogue as possible, and as much as I'm able to, I will respond to emails and to comments that are posted on the websites. So let me start with the first question, which is a very interesting one. Someone wrote, do Russia and China and India, do China and India have the power and the will to support Russia? Or is the Western pressure too great? Is Russia fighting alone? Now, there are lies being spread about the isolation of Russia. I just saw an article in Foreign Policy magazine saying that Russia is alone, Putin's gamble has failed, Russia's running out of ammunition, the sanctions are taking a big bite, and on and on and on and on. And this, of course, is the wet dream of the neoconservatives, that they're winning the fight, just as they claimed they won the war in Afghanistan, that they're going to win the war in Iraq, they're going to win the war in Libya, as they left bodies all over the streets, destroyed the capability of nations to survive, and yet they proclaim that they're about to win the war against Russia. Now, the best answer to the question comes from the summit on December 30th between Xi Jinping and Putin. Now, here are the comments of the two leaders. Putin said, "We are defending not only our own interests, but those of all who stand for a truly democratic world order and the right of countries freely to determine their own destiny," unquote. In other words, a mobilization on behalf of sovereign nations that wish to engage in relations outside of the dictates of the unipolar order. And Xi Jinping responded to that by saying that we're at a historic crossroad. And the question is, will we revert to a, quote, Cold War mentality, provoke division and antagonism and stoke confrontation? Or will we act out of the common good of humanity, promote mutual respect and win-win cooperation, unquote? And he said the current crisis is, quote, testing the wisdom of statesmen in major countries, unquote. Now, the question has an obvious implication. There is a threat from Western governments, from the Anglo-American world, that you must stick to our rules. And this is the old assertion of might makes right. And that's how the unipolar order intends to save itself, by imposing policies on countries that will provide income and benefit to the global corporate cartels of the World Economic Forum, of the City of London, and so on, but will provide nothing but crumbs to the countries that they're insisting subordinate themselves to their demands. Now, one of the problems is that they have fewer crumbs to offer now. Nations that are struggling to assert their sovereignty are not going to be satisfied with low-wage jobs and green technologies that don't give them access to the modern technologies needed in the world today. They can get that through the development of these multilateral institutions in the East, in Asia, the BRICS, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Forum. These are providing development perspectives that these nations not only need, but are demanding in the interests of their people. And so the trend now is away from subordination to Anglo-American military might. They still possess the will to act, to try to impose their intent, and they can use military and irregular warfare to do it. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be successful. It's a fight. It's a fight that you need to be involved in. We need to change the policies in the Western world, take the power out of the hands of the global oligarchs and the corporate cartels that control the governments and government policies. Now, evidence that this is happening, the most recent example is President Marcos of the Philippines with his trip to China. Tens of billions of dollars of deals were signed on this trip. And the tension that was stoked by the West over the South China Sea appears to have been resolved. Now, the question is, what's the benefit of joining global NATO for a country such as the Philippines? What will they get from that? Are they supposed to serve as a platform for a war against China? Well, I think we're going to see more and more governments jumping ship of the Western alliance. We've already seen it. And this is going to happen increasingly as we're seeing a de-Westernization and a de-dollarization take place in much of the world. Now, a second question came in. What do you make of Putin's declaration of a 36-hour truce to celebrate Orthodox Christmas? Well, let's start from the negative on this. Zelensky. What he said is that this is a sign of Russia's weakness, that they're trying to halt the Ukrainian advance. Now, Zelensky, in rejecting this, is following the dictates of his NATO controllers. And they're committed to the continuing loss of Ukrainian lives in order to try to weaken Russia. And of course, you've seen the story that again has been refuted by people like Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, Richard Black, and others, who have pointed out that Ukraine cannot win this war. They can't win it because they're running out of men. The Western countries that are pushing them to keep fighting are running out of weapons. But they're going to continue to push because that's the only way the controllers of the unipolar order see that they can survive. So they're using a puppet like Zelensky and his government to try to weaken Russia by continuing the war over the bodies of the Ukrainian population. Now, this is just another shameful response from Zelensky to reality. We also have the story of what's happening with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They're not allowed to use their monastery in Kiev for Christmas services this year by order of Zelensky and his government. That not only will there be no Christmas service there, but instead the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is the official church that Zelensky recognizes, will take over the church of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Now, this is even though the Ukrainian Orthodox Church declared independence from Moscow after the launching of the special military operation. So what do we make of this? Well, Putin, I think, is trying different angles to achieve a negotiated settlement. And yet all we see from the West is more war, more weapons, more money for armaments, and that's the tragedy of this situation. Now, we see this also in another form. A regular viewer called my attention to the arrest in Latvia of the editor of the Sputnik news agency in Lithuania. And this is, again, a suppression of free speech. You know, we're told that the West is the democracy where we have free speech and so on. And yet we now see another case of an arrest of an official probably going to be accused of spying. Well, at the same time, the Lithuanian culture minister has called for a, quote, mental quarantine against Russian culture. Now, he's trying to be moderate in this. He said he's not going to have an outright ban on Russian culture, which has been called for by Ukraine's culture minister, but to have a mental quarantine, which is a form of pre-bunking. In other words, you're not even allowed to expose yourself to ideas from another country and another culture. And this is a form of ethnic cleansing, of this kind of cultural attack. I think the best response to this was that of the often quite ironic spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova. She said that the Lithuanian official is a, quote, lack of culture minister, unquote. And she said it appears he's already put himself into, quote, mental quarantine for quite some time. Now, I'm going to, if my computer will cooperate, I'm going to give you some aspects of the Twitter story, because I had a number of questions. What do you make of the Twitter files? Will this change anything? Is Musk serious about changing the culture at Twitter? And more broadly, someone asked, when will there be retribution for the officials who have been caught lying and interfering? Well, I just wrote an article which will be appearing on my blog page at the LaRouche organization, probably by the weekend, saying that the Twitter files show that it was the U.S. intelligence community that interfered in U.S. elections, not Russia. And we're seeing this when Musk released the files of Twitter. There's just ample evidence that it was not just Twitter that was censoring. In fact, sometimes there was some pushback from Twitter, as Matt Taibbi told Tucker Carlson in a January 4th interview. You know, the line that came out initially when the Twitter files were released was that Twitter can't be accused of violating the First Amendment because the First Amendment prohibits government interference with free speech and free press. Well, that's true. And Twitter is a corporation, it's not government. But what the files show is that the U.S. government agencies, including the FBI, Homeland Security, the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Agency, even Representative Adam Schiff, who at the time was the House Intelligence Committee chairman, Schiff told Twitter to ban the reporter Paul Sperry because he didn't like Sperry's reporting. So what we see from these files is massive intervention by government agencies using the argument that the social media is being used by foreign countries to subvert the U.S. Now, in the interview with Tucker Carlson, Taibbi was asked, what is how significant was the U.S. government role in censorship? And what Taibbi said is, quote, the government was in the censorship business in a huge way. He said that files confirm that every wing of the U.S. government was sending moderation requests. That is, moderation meaning cut out certain posts. He said from the National Security Agency, FBI, DHS, and he said there were also files showing other government agencies, which he says is basically a code for the CIA. He said that the evidence shows the intelligence community was getting their hands on speech. Now, he gave several other examples of how this was done. And he used the case of the internal guidance memo that was circulated within the moderation team at Twitter, where they said explicitly that, quote, privately, we will remove content, publicly, we will only remove content at our sole discretion. In other words, Twitter would make the decision. But then they said privately in this memo, we will remove content identified by the U.S. intelligence community, which comes from a foreign state actor, unquote. And so this is clearly the case that the dictates were coming down from the intelligence community to suppress stories, including, of course, the famous Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, here's what Taibbi said specifically about the FBI. He said, files show the FBI acting as a doorman to a vast program of social media surveillance and censorship, encompassing agencies from across the federal government. And he cited an FBI official who said, Twitter had so much contact with so many agencies that executives of Twitter lost track. Is today the Department of Defense and tomorrow the FBI? Is it the weekly call or the monthly meeting? It was dizzying, unquote. And he went on to say that federal intelligence and law enforcement reach into Twitter included the Department of Homeland Security, which partnered with security contractors and think tanks to pressure Twitter to moderate content. Now, the FBI finally responded and said the FBI was simply doing its mandatory job of keeping an eye on things. And they said that it's unfortunate that we're seeing conspiracy theorists running these stories. The conspiracy theorist defense, the argument that those people who criticize what the FBI is doing are conspiracy theorists. Well, I think what we've seen is that it's not a conspiracy theory. It's an actual conspiracy that was being run that goes back to Russiagate. And it's not surprising that the initial revelations from the Twitter files exposed the 50-plus former intelligence agents who signed a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop issue has all the, quote, classic earmarks of Russian disinformation, unquote. And even when New York Times reporters confirmed the validity of the emails from the Hunter Biden laptop, we still haven't seen any consequences to people like Brennan, who continues to be a commentator on major news stations, or the whole grouping that signed that. Nor has there been any consequence for the FBI officials who used false documents like the Steele dossier to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. So if you look at the period from 2016 up to today, we're seeing lies about so-called Russian involvement in the U.S. when in fact the interference in U.S. election is coming from U.S. agencies. And that's the real story of the Twitter files. Now, we're going to be having an extensive series of events over the next week to 2 weeks. I'll post them again at the bottom of the description page today. Sign up for them and join with us, because we're at a moment now where we can make this the year where we break the power of the corporate cartels and the financial oligarchy that have taken over and control our government. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you on Monday.